Good morning, students. Today we're going to look at the first key question we're examining this week, which is why did attempts between 1800 and 1850 by northern and southern states to find compromises or a middle ground over the expansion of slavery ultimately fail, leading to a civil war in 1861. Okay, so let me summarize it here. As the United States expanded westward, remember we were talking about westward expansion a couple of weeks ago, Northerners and Southerners increasingly argued over whether the future states that would be carved out of these new territories should be free or should be slave states. Now, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 were attempts to diminish these rising tensions between northern free states and southern slave states. Looking at the historical map of the Missouri Compromise of 1820 here, you'll see that in 1803, the huge Louisiana Territory, remember, had been acquired by Jefferson. But the question of whether or not slavery should be allowed in the future new states that would be carved out of the Louisiana Purchase led to increasing tensions between northern free states and southern slave states. And that led in 1820 to the Missouri Compromise, when northern opponents and southern supporters of the expansion of slavery struck a deal or a compromise. And the compromise stipulated that Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. Missouri is right here. Slavery would be allowed. Maine, also a new state, would be added as a free state, no slavery. And furthermore, all territories and future states north and west of the 3630 latitude, which is here, would be slavery free in the future. This area in green would be slavery free. So that was the deal. And this Missouri Compromise initially did calm down tensions between southern slave states and northern free states. However, we see here when we examine the historical map and compromise in 1850, that pretty soon, 30 years later, a new compromise had to be struck. And that was because of the acquisition of Texas in 1845 as a new state, and then especially the conquest of Mexico, of a huge territory known as the Mexican Cession in 1848. These new territories revived the question of slavery. Would these new territories and states be slave states or free states? This led to great what we call sectional tension between the North, which was free of slaves, and the South, which was full of slaves. Okay, and the compromise, then the outcome would be the Compromise of 1850, yet another attempt to calm things down. Okay, so the Compromise of 1850 tried to settle these differences, and it stipulated that, one, California would be admitted as a free state, while the remaining portions of the Mexican Cession here would be organized into the New Mexico Territory and the Utah Territory, and that under the concept of popular sovereignty, eventually the people of each territory, when these territories turned into individual states, would decide by vote, that's what popular sovereignty is, by vote whether or not slavery would be permitted in their country. Okay, and that was a compromise, but it also opened up a can of worms because it meant that eventually when there was a vote, if there was a vote, there would be a fight, a political fight, but perhaps something more than a political fight over whether the new states would be slave states or not. Now, the compromise also included a more stringent or strict fugitive law that enraged Northerners. Because what it stipulated was that slaves that escaped to the north had to be returned to the south by law, and that made Northerners very angry. So that part of the Compromise of 1850 also sowed the seeds for further tensions. So, how do we answer the first question of the week? Why did attempts between 1800 and 1850 by northern and southern states to find compromises over the expansion of slavery ultimately fail? Well, the first simple answer is that America just kept on growing in size. expanding westward, opening up the question of whether new territories and states would be free or enslaved again and again over the course of the first half of the 19th century. Now, this Compromise of 1850, it worked for a while in dealing with the Louisiana Purchase, but then the acquisition of Texas and the Mexican Cession revived tensions. The response was the Compromise of 1850, but that would fail too, in part because of what I mentioned before. It stated that the future states that would be carved out of the New Mexico and Utah territory, the people would vote on whether it be a free state or a slave state, and that sowed the seeds for further tensions later, but also the fugitive law, right, which enraged so much the North. So we've now answered our first question of the week, and I hope you're ready for tomorrow's assignment. I just want to conclude here by reminding you that in my second lecture on Wednesday, we'll explore why the decade of the 1850s proved to be such a turning point that led ultimately, short term I should say, led to the Civil War of 1861. And in so doing, we will continue to explore the long-term causes and origins of the Civil War, but also the short-term ones, those events that happened in the 1850s that lead directly to war in 1861.